Hi, everybody. Thank you to the Awwwards for having me, and thank you for coming and listening. I am Stefanie, and I'm a designer whose favorite material is data. And I create data-driven designs for both art commissions and commercial work. These headsets, they kill me. Okay, ranging from information design to creating physical objects and public installations from data. I create work that uses data as a starting point in order to communicate messages that go beyond the statistical insight locked within the data itself. And these messages are often more subjective, often more emotional. And this process can be seen in this piece on the left for the Olympic Park last year in East London, made using data that school children had collected from the park, not for statistical insight, but instead to inform the design of a new data-driven park landscape created from the haphazard, chaotic data gathered by these youthful data collectors. And another example can be seen in a collection of 1,000 small drawings on index cards that visualize data from 1,000 frequently used English words, visualized not to draw statistical insight, but instead to highlight the beautiful variation in the English language. And this was displayed at the British Council Pavilion at a book fair in Mexico last year. So you see, instead of using paper, marble, or clay to create with, as a designer, I choose to communicate with data. And now, working with data as a designer was a natural fit for me, and I'm often surprised that more designers don't choose to work in this way, as it makes sense in this day and age where we create data almost just by breathing, that this would be a plentiful material for designers to work with and also to critique. And also, while working with data as my material, for many projects in my past, I often ended up shaping it and molding it through analyzing it by hand. And of course, I do work with developers, but I don't code myself, or not very well. And so I often focus on this very manual engagement with data. As for data visualization, I see it as a design process that I use to work with this new material, a process that as we move into the future will be as common a method for a designer to create and communicate with as much as the golden mean, color theory, design systems, and all of the other rules of thumb and tools that designers use daily. And because of this, I'm also interested in furthering these skills within the design community. Seeing data visualization as a vital part of communication design has challenged me to extend the visual languages designers use to work with data, exploring ways of presenting data that, besides being legible, are more memorable and more expressive to a lay person audience who might just be learning about data for the first time. So instead of only approaching data projects with visual responses like this, that could mean making data danceable, like this project as the first data artist in residence at Facebook, where I converted a month of a couple's interactions on Facebook into dance steps, bringing their digital dance across Facebook timelines into a physical space. Or it might mean making data hoppable, such as my open data playground at the South Bank Centre in London, where hopscotch games were created from open data sets in order to communicate how open data sets are online for anyone to interpret and play with however they choose, even if some interpretations are more unconventional than others. And it could also mean a project, a data project that's touchable and wearable, such as in this art commission I created with Miriam Quick, where we explored physical ways of communicating open air quality data from Sheffield in 2014 in a memorable, experiential way for a citizen audience who might not be interested in air quality or data in general. And so one part of the project presented weeks of particulate matter data as something you could touch and wear, and the other part communicated a day of pollution levels in Sheffield through glasses that would make your vision more or less polluted and hazy depending on the data. But even when rendered in these very playful ways, talking about data and getting people to care about it is still a challenge. And many people, many of you perhaps, see data as boring and inaccessible, or at least I'm basing this anecdotally on like how many people switch off at parties when they ask me what I do. And also, when I was creating the Open Data Playground for the South Bank Center that I showed you earlier, I asked someone who was nearby the installation if they knew what open data was, and they asked me, well, what's data? And it gave me pause for thought, because data can often feel like an indecipherable topic to many people, even to me. And I'll confess right now and say that, even I don't adhere to all the data privacy advice and data checks that I should. I'm always getting the feeling that I'm really only seeing the tip of the iceberg. And so this idea of data can feel overwhelming, even to someone who's made her career from it. But I believe that a lot of this is because to most people, data feels like something that's far removed from their daily lives, locked away, bigger than they are able to comprehend, cold, clinical, computerized, hidden away in these big blue servers, like in this photo of a Google data center. And if we want people to begin to care and be interested in something that's not going away and will be part of their lives for the foreseeable future, then we need to find a different approach. And I think that I've been getting closer to understanding how to make data, make this material more accessible after embarking on the next project that I'll show you, which is a recent collaboration with Georgia Lupi, the creative director of the information design agency Awwwards, based in New York and Milan. Now, Georgia and I had met only twice in person when in 2014 we decided to collaborate. And we wanted to collaborate because we discovered we have a lot of personal and work similarities. The first, this used to say that we're both expats, but I've changed it because of this week. We're both proud immigrants. Georgia is a proud immigrant from Italy living in New York, while I am a proud immigrant from America living in London. So yay, immigrants, that's my little shout out. We're also both the same age, like a month apart, and we're also both only children, but the biggest thing, the most important thing, is that we don't really code, but both prefer to work with data in this very handcrafted, analog way that I described earlier, in contrast to the often standard use of computing and algorithms as part of the data visualization process. And so we decided to challenge ourselves. Since data visualization was the language that we spoke for work, we would use this language to get to know each other better, ideally in a very analog, hand-drawn way. Somebody left this up here. I thought it was like in my head, but I'm glad it wasn't. Okay, yeah. So we wanted to get to know each other better in this hand-drawn way. And over a summer of emails back and forth, we decided to use our biggest constraint, that we live on different continents, as our biggest asset. And we came up with a project that we called Dear Data, a year of sending each other hand-drawn data postcards back and forth across the Atlantic. So starting on the 1st of September 2014 and lasting a year, every week we collected our personal data around a shared topic to investigate aspects of ourselves and our days we then share with the other person. And then at the end of the week, we would spend time looking at this data and analyzing it, and then painstakingly draw our visualizations and their annotations on a postcard. And once we were finished, we would drop the postcard in our mailbox or our post box and wait with our fingers crossed. And if all went well, the postcard would hopefully arrive at the other person's address, though sometimes arriving scuffed, crumpled, and rained upon. And then we would each grab a coffee, sit down with the postcard, and read and learn more about the other person's life. Now, all of our postcards followed the same structure. The fronts of the postcards contained no text or explanation, just the drawn data. And then the back of the postcard had the address and stamp, of course, but also a legend explaining how to read the drawings. And through this format, every week was an exploration of very small data made very human and personal due to its inherent imperfections, where even our choices in data collection, what we chose to include and what not to include, functioned as a unique representation of each person. And over the year, the whole project became a fragmented self-portrait sent to the other. So now, just to show you briefly how the project unfolded and developed over the year, I'll just show you a few postcards. So the first week we started the year gathering quite strange data, gathering data on how often we checked a clock for the time. Kind of weird. And then next, for the second week, we tracked our walks and transportation through our cities. And here we turned the movement tracking app on to gather this data. And this was actually the first and the last time where we use an external app to automatically track us. As we agreed, it felt we weren't really in control, and it felt impersonal to be tracked by an app as opposed to personally tracking our own data. And so as the weeks progressed, we mainly explored themes requiring manual data collection, focusing on what computers can't gather, or at least they can't yet, and trying to move beyond the usual quantified self data into something more akin to personal documentary. And as we went through the year, we gathered data on a variety of topics, like lighthearted topics like our drinking, or how much we swore in a week on screen, or we would experiment with trying to capture like data or emotions that were very fleeting, like trying to gather data on every time we laughed, which is, obviously like kind of this impossible challenge. And we also explored gathering data that forced us to confront the less than perfect sides of ourselves, like a week of envy or a week of negative thoughts. And then some of the way through the year, we extended the project beyond only real-time data gathering, moving to weeks where we surveyed parts of our lives for the other, like surveying our collection of books on screen, or our music collections, our wardrobes, and so on. And since, in the process of gathering data on your behavior, it inherently changes your behavior, we also tried performative data tracking, where we tried to gather particular data sets in the hope the data gathering would make us change our behavior in a positive way, like trying something new, which is on screen, or smiling at strangers, or being nicer to the people around us. And then at the end of the year, after 52 weeks, we said goodbye to a project with a week of goodbyes. So like every time we said goodbye to something or someone. So quickly, as a collected whole, this is what all of Georgia's weekly responses for that year looked like. And then this is my year of the drawings. And that was just a really quick run through the project, but if you want to see all of the postcards close up and in detail, they're in book form, published by Penguin in the UK or Princeton Architectural Press in the US, so, buy that, please. But yeah, so that's the project, and now I'll just talk about a few of the professional insights we learned as we moved through the year drawing and sending postcards to each other. So firstly, the year made us believe in the benefits of human-scale data. In Dear Data, we found that this small, very human scale we've been working on has opened the idea of data to a wider audience and made it more approachable. And Georgia and I had both found with previous projects, like like my open data playground I showed you earlier, that when you're reaching a wider audience, it's often difficult to get people to understand what these like big data or open data is if they don't know what data is in the first place. So, now we see we need to explore projects to answer this question first. And because Dear Data looked at domestic and often mundane data that most people can relate to, we've been able to show that data is something that is quite simply in every aspect of our lives, and it isn't necessarily always scary or intimidating. And in short, we think that this small human-scale data is a friendly stepping stone into more in-depth, bigger picture conversations about data's place in our culture and society, data privacy, and so on. And so starting small is how we hope to increase data literacy and further these conversations. And also, by gathering, analyzing, and drawing our small data in this very manual way, we're highlighting how when learning basic principles of working with and visualizing data. You don't need fancy programs or incredible data analysis skills to begin. All you really need is, a pencil or some drawing materials. Now, another thing we noticed when we launched the project publicly. And we saw people begin to describe Dear Data in new ways, using words where data begins to feel human and where data is being described as something warm instead of something cold, and changing the perception of what's possible with data and moving beyond only thinking data is boring or inaccessible. And the positive feedback we received about Dear Data in a variety of media is testament to the fact that this manual, domestic way of introducing to people to data resonates with them. And we've also received emails from people across the globe who are starting their own Dear Data correspondence projects, and some of them are even doing it for an entire year, which I think is impressive because it was stressful, or are using it as part of their teaching materials for all ages, from primary school to university and beyond, to help students learn to collect and present data. And so we've both been really excited about how something that was effectively a side project between two designers, like just a portfolio piece, ended up being a community project. And as we move into the future, this is something we're looking to expand upon. So, okay, so that was like our usual Dear Data Insights thing that we always sort of say with the project. And I'm freelance, and Dear Data and the resulting book have kind of been my biggest projects for the past 2 years. And now the dust is settling, and I've been asking myself, why was a project like this so successful? What aspect of the human experience were we tapping into that made people, or at least some people, excited about this small data? And like I mentioned before, well, you could probably hear it, I am American, and I've spent the last 14 years in the UK, and I've been a British citizen for the past 4, over time beginning to better understand the nuance and idiosyncrasies of UK English and British culture. And as I've made my home in my newfound country, at some point I stumbled upon a British slang term that piqued my interest. And it was the slang term anorak. And this is actually one of the UK phrases that I really love because it's so evocative of a very particular type of hobby and person. And just as an aside for all the British people in the audience, do people use this slang term anymore, or is it like an old slang term? I'm trying to figure this out, so if someone could tell me after, that would be awesome. But yeah, so like after researching this term online, I can define an anorak as a derogatory term for a person who's interested in the accumulation of minuscule, arcane, and often useless bits of information. And then someone else said online that the term derives its name from, quote, the type of coat worn by train spotters while they scribble frantically into their notebooks on the end of cold, lonely railway platforms, so like sort of like this guy that you see on screen. And so, okay, so if I look at an anorak's usual output, which is like, you know, like train spotters and bird spotters, like lots of handmade notations and jottings and tallies, and then I look at my output, I can see that actually there are a lot of similarities between them and me. And this is when I realized, particularly after Dear Data, that I was most definitely a card-carrying anorak. And I know that this slang term is derogatory, and it's seen to be nerdy, uncool, and antisocial to be away collecting data on the things that you're passionate about, but I mean, obviously I don't think that. And I'm really surprised that this word is so derogatory because it actually applies to everyone in this room, because I would say that all of us are kind of secret anoraks in our own way, and all of us are collecting seemingly useless information that helps us to find our place in a world that's ever shifting and changing around us. And you know, we all are acting like data magpies, collecting numbers and storing them away as we move about our day. And you know, I think many of us in this room follow their weight avidly, watching every tiny creep of weight up and down the scale. Many of us are very used to the continual tracking of the price of a pint in London, which I saw £6. I mean, like for a craft beer, but that just like gave me a heart attack. And some of us might be gathering a different type of data altogether, like, you know, like notches on a bedpost that tally up all the people we slept with. I mean, not everyone, I'm not judging anyone here either. Or we might be keeping track of the countries and places we visited on a wall map at home, or doing some careful mental calculations of how many calories we've eaten today. And if we really stop to reflect upon it, many of these numbers I've mentioned could also be considered as meaningless and as useless as the data that that nerdy anorak was collecting. But we would never chastise a new parent for their collection of the often useless data that's traditionally gathered in a baby book. These numbers document an important moment in their lives, and these are cherished and held onto through the years. And so, you know, people gather data to get closer to the things they love and they're passionate about. And through this, we can see that the basic act of collecting data on a topic or any topic means it's important to the author and brings the author closer to the subjects they care about. So looking like at the data that you gather as a seeker anorak is a way of figuring out what's really important to you. And so this is something that we all do, unknowingly, and it's an experience that we all partake in. And I think there can be meaning, satisfaction, and enjoyment in this experience, even if it doesn't have an explicit purpose or explicit statistical insight. And I think experience is the right word here. Data gathering's been part of our human experience for tens of thousands of years. Early writing systems such as cuneiform and the like were not only used to record poetry and mythology and history, but were also used from the beginning to record data, to record accounts. And when we look at data from this viewpoint, we can see a view of data that is quite different to the often cold and computerized perception of big data, where data can now be seen as something warm and part of the human story, and data gathering is an act that can often be joyful, emotional, memorable, and meaningful. And so I think that this is what the Dear Data project tapped into, these like secret latent anoraks that we all have within us, the part of us that finds pleasure in the experience of marking our world through these numbers we grab in this very imperfect way, and like maybe almost makes like being an anorak a little more socially acceptable. And I think that this latent interest is something that we should channel more when trying to communicate about data to a wider audience. Now, this imperfect, emotional, anorak-style small data approach often ruffles the feathers of many scientists and data visualization practitioners because statistical insight isn't the main reason for gathering and visualizing this data. And then in these communities, it can be very heated debates happening where they question whether there needs to be a division between data visualization and art, and like proposing firm rules about what is allowed to be data visualization and what is not. And often, when describing my practice, I've been questioned for this way of working with data. And while giving talks, people would ask me, what's the key insight of these projects? What's the key truth? And as though I was creating a science experiment or a piece of journalism, and I couldn't really answer. And so this is like, when I couldn't answer, this is when I began to start unpicking my practice to better articulate why I do work with data in this way. And well, I mean, basically, because of my anorak tendencies. But now, I believe more than ever that we don't have to just collect and visualize data for statistical insight, like creating like data visualizations and data journalism. Like that's not the only thing we can do, but a data set can be collected and presented with a focus on revealing a collector or visualizer's emotions, wants, needs, personality, and so on. And so now, artists can respond to a data set in the same way they can respond to an event, an era, or something in the culture around them. And anoraks can gather data for the experience and enjoyment of using this process to get closer to something that they love. And so I'm excited about how a data set can function in these spaces where the same data set can be a scientific and analytical material and a cultural material, eliciting different responses in these different spaces. And all of these responses are valid and valuable. But I would say that with different people working with data in different ways, there's a similarity between the two camps, with data scientists on one side and anoraks and artists or designers on the other. And while working with data in different ways, they're both looking for truth and understanding, except for they're using that truth to different ends, but both ways are good and valid. And these anorak-style, not very statistical projects that might be imperfect artifacts from an imperfect human experience might feel more approachable and a better way to get more people interested in and understanding data in the first place. And so Georgia and I believe that the warmer direction that we're championing is finding success in the design community, as we've had some incredible validation of this approach, both through being nominated for the Design Museum's Designs of the Year Awards this year, and also because we're just really proud to say that our 104 original postcards and the many sketchbooks that we filled with intermediate data drawings were acquired by the Museum of Modern Art in New York at the end of last year. So, yay. Georgia and I pleased that our postcards will live in the archives and catalog of one of the world's most prestigious institutions, or at least we think so. And just like hopefully sitting next to the work, of the great masters from the past 2 centuries. And this really amazing acquisition has definitely convinced us that when it comes to data, that we're on the right track. As Paola Antonelli, MoMA's senior design curator, states when describing the project, she says, "There's deep beauty and poetry in this exchange between two contemporary women and colleagues, and this engaged conversation describes the future of our relationship with information." And engaged conversation is the right phrase. When we received each other's postcards, Georgia and I would text each other and ask specific questions that started from the drawn conversations found in our data. And it's been a reminder to us that our personal data was always a starting point in the beginning of a deeper conversation in our lives. And I believe that we, everyone from designers to artists to data visualization specialists, all need to remember that our perception of data isn't fixed and steadfast, but is a conversation that effectively started thousands of years ago. And that by creating projects that tap into that inner anorak that we all secretly harbor within ourselves, we can use these small personal experiences with data as a reference point as we shape the future of data in our society. Thanks.